I'm Sarah Bivens.
And I'm Matthew Bivens.
We had a home birth back in 2016.
So we started a podcast about it.
And then grew it into a birth brand to help future and current parents believe in their success with home birth.
This is the place to hear home birth stories, along with helpful resources and tips to feel empowered and supported in your birth journey.
This is Doing It at Home. Greetings, loved ones, and welcome back to Doing It at Home. I'm Sarah. My co-host is Matthew. We're so thrilled that you're here. We have a great episode for you today. Today's episode is titled Courageously Processing Grief and Trauma, Breech, Transfer, and Cesarean with Caitlin Thompson. Before we get into the episode, just want to thank you once again for joining. If you are new to the space, this is Doing It at Home. This is where you get prepared, confident, and excited for home birth. That is what the entire premise of Doing It at Home is. Through our empowering birth stories that you'll hear on the podcast, through the community and the support that we have online in our private Facebook group, our social media, as well as the online resources and coaching that we provide through our website. So you can go check all of that out. You can go to diahpodcast.com. Make sure you're following us. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you're notified every time an episode drops. And something fun and exciting and new, we have a YouTube channel, so you can subscribe to that as well. The link to that is going to be in the show notes of today's episode, as well as all of our social media profiles. There's a link to that, and we'll be dropping video content for you covering really relevant, popular topics from the podcast, some of our own life and journey of our Open to Conceive process that we've opened up about on the show here as we play for having another baby, having another home birth. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be answering questions, and we're also going to be putting some interviews on there as well. So go check that out, please. Go subscribe as we grow and add our content. That will really help us to gain the exposure and put the word out there about the channel. So would really appreciate that if you would go check that out, watch the videos that we currently have there, and be on the lookout for the ones that are coming. So today's episode is really powerful. It's actually the third time that we've had our friend Caitlin on the podcast, so that's pretty cool. We got to speak with her a couple years ago now. It's really funny how time flies. It's been a minute, but we chatted with her about her conception journey with her first pregnancy and birth and the insemination process that she and her wife Shona went through. And then the second episode we did with her was the birth story of their daughter Florence. So I have links to both of those episodes in the show notes. You should definitely go check those out if you have not listened to them already. But if you have, then Caitlin might be familiar to you. So in this episode, we talk about LGBTQ family, insemination process and trying to conceive, sperm donation. We talk about her second birth and the home birth transfer to hospital that occurs in the experience. We talk about consent in the hospital, cesarean birth, and processing and healing birth trauma. And just as a note, potential trigger warnings for you as it relates to a hospital transfer, a cesarean, and some consent conversations about, some of the traumatic elements that Caitlin did experience in her birth. So just want to put that out there for you kind of as a heads up. It's a really beautiful conversation. We're so grateful to Caitlin for sharing so openly about her process and really being an example for others in terms of the healing journey and processing and unpacking. And there's a beautiful quote that since having this conversation with Caitlin, I have shared with so many friends in different conversations. And it's about being where your feet are. So that's what I'm going to say right now. You'll hear more about it in the conversation, in the interview, but being where your feet are and the power of being present and in the moment. So with that, we will have a short message from our sponsor, and then you will hear Caitlin's story. Hi, Caitlin. Welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Sarah. How are you doing?
We're awesome.
Yes, we are. And we're so grateful to have you back once again, Caitlin. This is so fantastic to hear your voice, and we're really excited to just chat with you today. So thank you.
Me too. It's been a minute.
It has. And this is three-peat. I think you might actually be the first to be on the show 3 times.
Woo!
I think we'll have to give you an honorary Doing It at Home plaque or something.
I feel
Sash.
so honored.
Yeah, a sash. Is that what you said? Like in a
Yes,
pageant?
A pageant sash.
That would be amazing. We should do that. But yeah, that I love that about this space is that, you know, each birth is so different. It's each experience and story is so different. So it's like, it won't get old over here. So I love that we could do this and revisit, and, you know, you can share part of yourself and your family with us again. It's really an honor, you know, that we get to be a part of so many families' lives. And like, you see the babies grow, and then you see, you know, I see on social media Doing It at Home mamas who are on their second, third, fourth babies, you know, from being on the show the first time. And it's like, wow, it's so incredible. So thank you and Shona and your whole crew, which we're going to be talking about because the crew has grown since we last spoke.
Yes, it has.
So how about you just recap for us? And I'm also going to put links in the show notes, dear listener, of our first two episodes that we had with Caitlin. So the first one was episode 126, and I'll put a link in there. And that was kind of the pre-birth story. It was background on your pregnancy journey, your conception. And then episode 185 is the birth story of Florence. And so now here we are having another birth story. So I'll put those links in the show notes so you can kind of get full background and everything and the full scope of this family and experience. But why don't you just, you know, recap for us, you know, who you are and what y'all are up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Caitlin, and I live in Ontario, Canada with my wonderful wife, Shona. And we now have two daughters. Florence is our older daughter, who is 3 years old now. And our most recent addition, who is just 3 months, is Juniper. And she was born on April Fool's Day this year. And we still have our two fur babies, Lacey and Millie, two rescue pups that we have. They're getting older, but they still, you know, hang around and put up with all of our madness.
Yes, they were a part of the story, if I remember correctly. Like, they were part of an emotional support team for you, right?
They definitely were. With Florence's birth, Lacey followed me around during my labor, and we have some really amazing shots of her, sort of standing guard while I was laboring.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, dogs are pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's great. I do remember being very struck by the photos of your birth and when we shared those and when you sent some to us so that we could share it when we put the podcast out there. So I'll have to reshare some of those in anticipation for publishing this episode because they were really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Cool. So this time around with becoming pregnant again, can you just give us a little bit of that backstory and kind of the intentions that you set and how the conception journey was for you this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you listen back to the first episode that I was on, the journey for us as an LGBTQ couple is a little bit different. We don't have sperm at the ready. So it took us about 2 years to conceive with Florence. And we went through a journey of starting out with an unknown donor, which means that we selected a donor from a sperm bank who we would use. And after a number of unsuccessful attempts, we ended up switching over to a known donor who was a close friend of ours. And we ended up getting pregnant with Florence that way at home, the old-fashioned turkey baster way.
Yes.
Which actually means that, Josh, our donor, made a deposit for us, and we then used his sperm using a needleless syringe to insert the semen into me in hopes of conceiving a baby. And so this time around with Juniper, again, the journey was long, and anybody who has tried to conceive knows how emotional the journey can be when month after month you're trying to get pregnant and not. So it took us about a year to conceive Juniper, and this time we went with the known donor route again. We used Josh again, which was really important to us as a family to have the girls have the same donor, have the same story, just so that, we always want to be open with them about, where they came from and, have connection to that side of their history. So it took us about a year, and Josh lives in Montreal, which is about a 5-hour drive away. So there were some logistics involved in terms of getting me to Montreal at the time of ovulation, getting Josh to us at the time of ovulation. And then, we had a pandemic, so that made things complicated. So we did have to take a little bit of a break in between. But we ended up conceiving Juniper last July, around this time actually. And Josh's entire family came to stay with us for about 10 days at our cottage. And we were successful that time. So that's how Juniper came to be.
Oh, that's beautiful. What was it like having the whole family there? So the whole family was there in the cottage while you were ovulating, and so while the insemination was happening? Is that they were there for?
Yeah, so it it makes for good storytelling.
Yeah.
So Lauren and Josh are our donor family. Lauren I've known since I was 5 years old. She's one of my older friends. And they have 2 daughters together. So they have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. So we were all in our tiny cottage together, which made for a little bit of a chaotic time at times, particularly when it was go time and there were kids around. But we made it work and had some laughs, and we got it done.
Wow, that's amazing.
I appreciate that there's universality in the story, in the sense that, like you said, anyone who has been on a journey of conception can understand aspects of that. And like you said, whether or not you have sperm on tap, which I love that. I think that should be a hashtag. Whether or not you do, it's just there are things, there are feelings, there are emotions, there are sometimes calendars and logistics and intention setting and prayer. And, there's a lot of things that go into it. And regardless of if you are inseminating with a syringe or you have a human penis inside of you, like it's a journey. And so I even though I'm not going an insemination route, and like I have sperm on tap right here across the table from me, and we've, been a year plus into a conception journey, I can very much feel in that story, and I can empathize on a human level, and I can feel connected to you in that way. So that's just what I love about it is, we all have our unique factors, and yet there is a very universal way in which we can all connect in terms of how we conceive our babies and bring them into the world.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that it's such an important conversation, because I think it's one that doesn't happen often enough, just how what a journey it is and what an emotional roller coaster it can be. And it is universal. And we don't talk about it enough. So thanks for mentioning that, Sarah.
Yes. And you said before we were on this interview, we were just chit-chatting and kind of catching up. It was about 8 attempts, you would say, about that of the insemination?
I would say it was at least 8, yeah.
Gotcha.
8 to 9, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
With a whole lot of travel.
Yeah. So
a lot of train rides and things like that. So.
Yeah. So then how was it when you became pregnant? How was it when you found out you were pregnant?
I mean, it's always a bit of a shock and disbelief, I think. I think that, I think you create meaning to things. So there would always be the times when I would be traveling to Montreal, and it would be lining up for something significant, and I would be like, this is the time. And so then when they were here, that I attached meaning to as well, because I was like, well, they're here for such a long time, and like we're together as a family, and so I created meaning for that. And so I almost like didn't believe it when it happened, because I was so used to being let down. I do remember peeing on a pregnancy stick and, looking at it in the bathroom in the terrible light. And it was one of those pregnancy tests where you almost couldn't even see that there was a line, but there was like a shadow of a line. And I remember bringing it out to Shona and showing it to her, and both of us squinting at it in the light, being like, is that a line? Is it not? And then every day the line getting a little bit darker and a little bit darker. But that first test was like, is this real or is it not? So yeah.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Matthew and I were nodding our heads when you said about the meaning and stuff. I've totally been there. I've been like, well, it's Father's Day, or this is when we conceived Maya, or this will be Maya's birthday, or like I saw a dove fly across the sky, just like whatever it is, you see something and you're like, this is it. So I get it.
Caitlin, how did you all navigate those challenges when, it was taking longer than you desired? How did you stay patient? How did you stay faithful? How did you stay, just emotionally centered during that time?
I don't know that I did, to be honest. I mean, and I had been through it before. I don't think anyone can prepare you for a ride it is every month, because every month you think that you're going to be pregnant and then it doesn't happen and you have to go through that. I would also mention that while in conjunction with this, we were also seeing a fertility, like at a fertility clinic, sort of putting all of our eggs in putting our eggs in different baskets. So we did have Josh go and give a semen analysis, and he actually donated sperm at the clinic that we had put on ice just in case. In Ontario, Canada, also, we have one funded IVF cycle by the government. And so I also had my name on the list to undergo IVF should we not be able to conceive the way we wanted to. And actually the month that we did conceive was the month that I was supposed to start fertility drugs. I was supposed to get them in the mail. So again, creating meaning, because I was this is the last shot, because I really, really, really don't want to have to do it the other way.
Yeah.
I don't know that I every month was hard. And I think that there's sort of a solitary journey as the person whose body it's happening to. So I always felt really alone, I think. And even though Shona would be there trying to support in the best ways that she could, I think that it was hard for her too, because she just couldn't relate on the same level, I guess. So it's hard. It's really hard. It was really hard.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that's truth.
Realness.
And it's realness to your story and your journey and experience. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share. I appreciate it. I really am passionate about this stuff because I think that it's so important that we talk about these things so that people feel less alone.
Definitely.
Do you have any advice for anybody who might be going through it right now?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was that you just have to carry on. And I think also I needed to stop trying to change a whole bunch of things about my life. I needed to sort of carry on as if life was normal and just go about my business as if my life was normal. Stop trying all the different diets, stop trying to control, how much coffee I was drinking. Because that made it even more insane making. So, by the end of this last one, I just sort of lived my life and then had this on top of it. I mean, and that wasn't the perfect solution because I still was incredibly emotional throughout the whole journey, but I needed to create some normalcy around it as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about getting closer to the birth time and the birth story.
Great.
So overall, Caitlin, how was your pregnancy?
So it's so interesting. With Florence, I loved being pregnant and I felt great. And, I was on top of the world. And this pregnancy was a little bit different from the beginning. I would say that I had more morning sickness at the beginning. I also was chasing around a 2-year-old. So, I don't know if that had anything to do with it. And just overall, I was more fatigued. My body, I'm 3 years older now and I'm not a spring chicken. And so the whole thing was a little bit more arduous. My lower back was really sore. My hips were really sore. But overall, I was super, grateful. And I think that I had a good pregnancy overall. I didn't have hypermesis or anything like that. So it was just a little bit more of a slog than it was with Florence.
Gotcha. So how were you feeling towards the end of pregnancy then, as you're getting closer to the birth? Was any of that intensified, or was it still kind of just the same?
Oh, yes, definitely. So I think this was a huge part of it as well. Florence came early. So Florence came at 37 weeks and 1 day. And so I think that in the back of my mind, I always thought that this baby would come around that time too, even though the likelihood of that happening is probably very, very slim. But by the time I reached 37 weeks, I was sort of like, where is the baby? And I had never been so pregnant before. So I was sort of, I found the anxiety really ramped up, because the other thing too with Florence was that her water broke, like my waters broke first. Before I went into labor. And so it was sort of like, bam, my waters broke. Well, that must mean that something's happening. Whereas with this one, I wasn't sure that that was going to happen again. And so like, I didn't even really know what to look for when, like, is labor starting now? What's happening? I had a couple of weeks of prodromal labor where I would wake up in the night and have sort of timeable contractions, but nothing would happen. They would sort of peter out by the time the morning came. So I was tired and confused and stressed. And with Florence too, I worked right up until the day I gave birth. And that was my plan again with this pregnancy. However, what I noticed was with that prodromal labor, I just couldn't settle into staying at work. So I ended up like going on leave a little bit early. So yeah, it was definitely more intense than it was with Florence, because Florence just sort of showed up one day.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So how did you really know then that it was real labor when it was?
Yeah. So I went into labor with June at 39 weeks and 3 days. So still not even at my due date. And I felt like I was so overdue at that point, because I was so much bigger and I was so much more uncomfortable and I was so ready. And so the day before I went into labor, it was like a day like any other, but I was sort of having, I think what I had was mild contractions, mild tightening. And I was walking around, I remember walking around the Walmart and having contractions, and they felt a little bit more intense than the prodromal labor that I had been having earlier. And I was sort of like thinking to myself, wouldn't it be funny if my water broke right now? And that didn't happen, but I think that maybe that was the beginning of things. And then that night before, I put Florence to bed, and Florence, you know, as a toddler, every bedtime can be either a dream or it could be a nightmare. And we had such a beautiful night together. And I remember putting her to bed and thinking, like, wouldn't it be so lovely if I went into labor tonight and I had this beautiful last moment with my daughter, and, you know, and then, you know, we could have the baby. And that's actually what happened. So as I was going to bed, I remember feeling Juniper like shift in my belly. And so the whole pregnancy, June was like carrying higher than Florence was. She was kind of up in my rib cage, and like not really engaging in the way that Flo had. And so I remember feeling her shift, and then like putting my hand on my tummy and feeling that she was more centered. She wasn't so far over to the right side. And I asked Sho to put her hand on my stomach too, and she was like, oh wow, like she really noticed the difference. And then we went to bed, and around 2:30 in the morning I woke up and my waters were breaking. So that's sort of how it happened this time around. So I remember I woke up around 2:30, and it was sort of this familiar like pop and gush of fluid, and I was like, oh, here it is. And I got up and went to the bathroom and, you know, left a trail behind me, and sort of called out to Sho. Sorry, I have a Flo and a Sho, so
Yeah.
mixed up. So I called out to Sho to say, you know, babe, my waters are breaking. And, you know, I looked down and I was really happy to see that the water was clear. So I didn't really have any worry there. And so we sort of had we convened in the bathroom and sort of talked about what was next. And so I cleaned myself up and we went back to bed. And I think around just before 3, we decided to page the midwife to just let her know that we were, that the birth process was starting. And around that time, also Florence woke up. So, so Sho had to go and settle Flo and went back into bed. And I was sort of lying in bed, and we chatted with the midwife. And always what the midwife tells you is, you know, in early labor, get rest, go back to bed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if in the history of any person ever giving birth that advice has been taken or has been able to be taken.
Right.
Because
That's funny.
I don't know that anybody with the knowledge of what is about to happen to you can go back to sleep. So I lay in bed for probably, I don't know, 15 minutes and was like, this is not happening. There's no way. And I also at that point was starting to have contractions. And they were pretty mild at first and like very manageable. But again, it's like you do this comparison. So they felt similar to Florence's. They were coming, I would say, every like 6 minutes or so. And so our midwife had said to us, you know, get some rest and I'll give you a call sort of early afternoon tomorrow. And I remember when I was hanging the phone up with her thinking, there's no way that you're going to call me early afternoon tomorrow. Like the baby is 100% going to be here by then. And so I got up and decided that I really wanted to have a shower sort of while I was still coping well and like sort of just feel fresh and ready to have the baby. So Sho was in bed with Florence and I was sort of getting ready to have a shower, and we have a bathroom in the basement. So I decided to go into the basement to have the shower so that I didn't wake Florence up again. And so as I'm sort of collecting all my things, my bathrobe, my towel, my shampoo, the contractions are starting to come a little bit more. So I would say at this point, they're like 4 minutes apart, and getting stronger. And so we did have a photographer and we had a friend on call to look after Florence. I really, really wanted Florence to be here for the birth. You know, I'd spent so much time preparing her and talking to her about how the baby was going to come. We watched lots of videos of people giving birth so that she was aware of what was going to happen. We talked about how, you know, mommy might be in a little bit of pain and might be making noise. So that was a really, really important part for me. So at that point, I texted my photographer, and then I called our friend to say, you know, I think that, you know, my water has broken, contractions are coming. Like, I think it's probably a good idea that you get yourself ready and come over. And so this is at this point, I think just before 4 a.m. And I also called my mom before I got in the shower to let her know that my water had broken and things were probably starting. So then I remember getting in the shower and like trying to wash my hair and just having a contraction that just brought me to my knees. And I was like, oh, this is happening. It's happening fast. And I think at that point, I mean, I probably was showering for maybe 7 minutes. And I think I had 2 or 3 contractions in the shower and I was struggling to get through them.
Wow.
So I got out of the shower. And at this point, I paged my midwife again. And I think this was like around, I have a timeline here. I'll have a look. So I think I paged my midwife again at 4:18 a.m. And so we had a conversation. And again, she was like, do you want me to come now? Do you think I need you to do you think you need me to come now? And I wasn't sure because, you know, the contractions were like my water had just broke. It's only been like not even 2 hours. And I was like, I don't know, like I'm doing pretty well, but they're pretty intense. And so she was like, okay, well, I'll be on standby. If you think I need to come, like give me a call back. And so we hung up the phone. And then my photographer arrived just before 5. And in between the second page to the midwife and that, I went upstairs and like knocked on Flo's door and looked at Sho because she had fallen back asleep with Florence. And I was like, hey, babe, like, I think I need you because it was getting pretty intense. And then I remember like Sho got up. I think she had a shower too. And then I remember thinking to myself, I really probably should eat something before all of this happens. And like it's so funny. Like, I feel like with Florence's birth, I was so focused on just laboring. Whereas this time around, it was like, who am I calling? What do I need to be doing? It was totally like I wasn't fully embodied in it, I guess. And so I made toast for me and Sho and a cup of tea. And then sort of like everybody started to arrive. The photographer arrived just before 5. My friend Cody arrived at 5, who was going to be looking after Florence. And then I like made them tea. And it's like, why am I doing this when I should just be focusing on what's happening? And then I think that I remember everybody was in our den, which is where I was going to be giving birth. And this time I was dead set on having a birth pool. I don't know, for anyone who listened to my previous podcast, I wanted a birth pool with Florence, and I had bought a birth pool, and it arrived and was at my mom's house in Toronto, which is an hour drive from me. And it arrived the day that I went into labor and was in Toronto when I had Florence. So no birth pool, but I still had it from this time. So I had Cody and Sho sort of like setting that up as I was laboring. And I remember sort of laboring. I'm always a laborer who likes to stand and like sort of sway back and forth. And I also use the birth ball quite a bit this time. And I remember having one contraction and I felt my body bearing down. And I was like, that's strange and fast, and what's going on? And so I was like, I think I probably should like call the midwife back again. And I think I got Sho to page the midwife at that point, and she called back. And, I said to her, like, I'm sort of feeling like a lot of pressure in my butt, and like, I think you probably should come. And she was like, I'll be right there. So I continued to labor, and I was coping really well, and it was getting really intense. And I would say, contractions moved from, I don't know, 4 minutes to like 2 minutes apart. And they were just like, and I could feel my body. It felt like it was sort of like moving the baby down. And I sort of felt like I was pushy, but I didn't really believe it because it had been so quick. And I didn't think that it could possibly, like, I felt like my mind was playing tricks on me, because I was like, there's no way that I don't know, everything felt so much more intense with Florence in terms of just being so focused, and also having Sho by my side, whereas this time Sho was like busy setting up the pool. And I feel like I just wasn't focused. And so like, I wasn't acknowledging what was really happening. And I don't know. Yeah, it was just a very different experience. But my midwife arrived around 5:30. And I was doing pretty well, and I like let the midwife in, and we discussed where she was going to set things up. And at this point, the birth pool was pretty much ready to go. And at one point, Alana, my midwife, checked the fetal heart rate, and everything was good. And then I kept laboring, and at this point, Sho was with me, which was much better. She's the best birth partner and just really knows how to hold space for me while I'm going through, contractions. And I remember lying on the couch and like holding onto Sho's hand, and I remember looking up at everybody. And I think this was around 6 o'clock in the morning, and I just said, I don't know that I want to do this again. I don't know that I can do this again. And my midwife sort of like pops her head in and says, I feel like when people say that, it means that they're, getting pretty close, or they're in transition. Like, would you like me to do a vaginal exam to see how far along you are? And she said to me, she'd only been there for like 30 minutes at that point. And she said, typically like I wouldn't do a vaginal exam so quickly. But just the way that you're laboring, and I can tell that things are getting more intense, maybe we should do an exam. And so I agreed to that. And so she checked me on the couch, and I remember she checked me, and there's always this fine balance of like checking in between contractions. And so like it took a minute to like get there. And I remember her checking me, and she was sort of like, oh, oh, like you're fully dilated. So I was fully dilated, fully effaced, ready to push. And she was like, I can feel the head. The head's right there. And then all of a sudden she paused and she was like, that's not a head. And so at that moment, everything changed. And she, I don't know if she said it then or if she went away, but she left and went and talked to the other midwife who was there. And I think at that point she had Kaylee, the other midwife, call EMS, and then came back and talked to me. So she came back and she said, Caitlin, what I'm feeling isn't a head. What I'm feeling is the baby's gum, which means that your baby is breech, and the safest place for you to deliver this baby is in the hospital. And so I think we need, and so I don't think I was really computing what was happening. And so I was just like, okay, like I need to get in the car and all of these things. And she was like, no, like we need to call an ambulance. Like you need to get there now, because my body was pushing. I was pushing her out. And I remember looking at my midwife and saying, I don't want to go to the hospital. Like, no. And she said, I will do everything in my power to advocate for you to have a vaginal birth. But the safest place for you to do this is that if something was wrong, it's for you to be at the hospital. And so with that knowledge of her telling me, I will do everything I can to advocate for you to have a vaginal birth, I was like, okay, I'll go. And
just out of curiosity, Caitlin, is there anything legally that dictates birthing at home, breech? I'm just curious because I know it's so different everywhere. Or was there anything in her practice or her particular policies that dictated that for her to share with you that hospital was the route?
So that's a good question. And I think that I don't think there is anything legally. I think the problem is that our care providers across North America just aren't comfortable or trained in vaginal birth,
right?
Vaginal breech birth. And so I don't know what her level of experience was. If we had known that Juniper was breech, I would have done everything in my power to find a care provider who was comfortable and knowledgeable and trained in it. And I don't know that Alana, our midwife, had that much experience. And so the problem is that breech birth can go very, very well, but it can also go very, very badly. And so if it were to go badly, being in a hospital is the safer place, because then you have everybody there that you need to resuscitate the baby should they get stuck in the birth canal, et cetera, et cetera. So, however, looking back on all of it too, with the fact that like my body was already pushing her out, like the next hour was absolutely horrible, because it was basically an exercise in trying to keep a baby that's trying to come out in. So yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying. I'm just curious on some of those details.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to, share any and all information that I have. So at that point, the ambulance had been called. And so this was around, I have a timeline here. So around 6:08, Alana told me that we needed to go to the hospital. And at 6:12, the ambulance arrived. So it was all happening very, very quickly. And so there was a whole bunch of commotion around, I was very dead set that there was no way we were ever going to end up in a hospital. So for weeks was kept pushing me to pack a hospital bag just in case. And I was like, I don't need to pack a hospital bag. You're silly. And so I had sort of like half-assed packed a hospital bag, just like a couple of things in it, but it definitely wasn't what we needed. So there was this whole moment of like us trying to figure out what we needed and getting stuff ready. And I mean, why I say there was a whole moment, I think it was like 5 minutes, but anyway, by the time we got everything ready, I got into the ambulance at 6:16. And so the hospital that they took me to, so the other thing to note too, is that they took me to the closest hospital. They didn't necessarily take me to the best hospital. So Markham Stouffville is the hospital that I would have chosen because they have a very good obstetrical unit. And I think I probably would have had more luck there delivering vaginally. They took us to Port Perry, which is a smaller hospital, about 20 minutes away. I think they got me there in 10. So I walked out to the ambulance, and my midwife came with me in the ambulance. So that was the other thing too, is being separated from my partner because Sho couldn't come in the ambulance with me was horrible. So Sho had to follow behind the ambulance. So I get into the ambulance, I'm lying on my side, and the contractions now are coming, every minute. And with every contraction, my body is bearing down and trying to push her out. And so the ambulance ride was an exercise of Alana coaching me on how to hold the baby in. And I was holding her hand so tightly because it was really, really scary. And I remember looking at her, and at one point she said to the paramedic, I think we might have to deliver this baby like in the ambulance. So she was putting on her gloves, and I'm lying on the gurney, and it was just, I don't know, it was very, very chaotic. And so I think that it took us about 10 minutes to get to the hospital. They were driving really quickly. And then they wheeled me into the hospital on the gurney and into a room. And at that point, I guess the chaos is just building and building and building. And so at that point, I think that, we're both, me and Shona are both stressed, hyper aroused, not really able to process what is happening. And once we got into the hospital room, they wanted me off the gurney onto a hospital bed. And it's interesting, I'm very much want to be in control of my own body. And so, they're trying to move me, and I'm pushing them away and saying, thanks, but no thanks, I can get onto the bed myself. So I got myself onto the bed. And at that point I was on hands and knees, because if you're ever if your baby is coming out of you, lying on your back isn't necessarily the most comfortable position. So now I'm on my hands and knees on the hospital bed, and there's a flurry of activity around me. There's nurses, there's doctors, there's Shona, there's my midwife, there's, I don't know, there's lots of people. And I remember one of the nurses at that point was like, hey, sweetie, I'm going to need you to lie on your back so I can put in an IV. And I remember just yelling at her. I was like, not a chance. You can put, I'm going to be on my hands and knees where I'm comfortable right now, and you can put the IV in from here. Thank you. And then I think, this is where I would say it's a little bit of a trigger warning, where I feel like I suffered a little bit of I don't know. So I remember all of a sudden there was somebody giving me a vaginal exam without even introducing themselves to me. So I guess the doctor had shown up, and she took it upon herself to check the baby and hadn't asked for consent, didn't introduce herself. I didn't even know her name. And I remember freaking out and just saying, I think I yelled something. And then Shona and the midwife were right on the doctor being like, you can't do that. You need to ask for consent. So it wasn't a very good experience. And then because it was a smaller hospital, they didn't have a surgical team there. So we had to wait a few minutes for the surgical team to arrive. And again, I went to the hospital under the hope that, sorry, my daughter is screaming. I don't know if you can hear her. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I went to the hospital with the hope that I would be able to deliver vaginally. And that's really the only thing that got me in the ambulance. And then it became very apparent as soon as I was there that probably wasn't going to happen. And so we were waiting for the surgical team to arrive, and the doctor that was there, when she first checked me without my consent and then checked me again, what she discovered was that Juniper was actually a footling breech, so her feet were coming out first, which I guess makes the birth a little bit more risky, if you will, because with footling breech is what's good about vaginal head down delivery is that the largest part of the baby is coming out first. And so that the rest of the body is going to fit if the largest part comes out first. With breech birth, what happens is the bum or even the feet are much smaller than the head. And so it's like you're fully dilated, but you may not be. And so what's risky about breech birth is that if there isn't enough space for the head to come out, then the head gets stuck. And that's where you run into complications with the baby not getting enough oxygen. And so because Juniper was footling, which means that her feet were coming out first, it made it even more complicated, I guess. There isn't anything to say that, like, I feel and believe in my heart that if I had just let nature take its course, that we would have been fine. And I would have saved myself a ton of trauma and a ton of pain. But I think it's really interesting that because I then, like, I entered into a space where people weren't comfortable doing what my body wanted to do, that my control and power was taken away from me. I think it's interesting sort of looking back on the doctor's notes. There's a line in the doctor's notes saying that, you know, I discussed the risks and benefits of a cesarean section with Caitlin and Shona, and they agreed. And, you know, yes, while maybe they talked to me about, you know, what was going to be happening, I didn't feel that there was any informed consent happening. All I know was that there was a whole bunch of chaos happening. And because we were then waiting for a surgical team to arrive, the doctor, with every contraction that I was having, was physically going inside my vagina and holding Juniper in because she was coming out. Like, she was basically like in the birth canal at that point. And then I remember finally the surgeon showing up, and he was this towering man, and he's standing over me, explaining to me what was going to happen. And, you know, at that point, you're just in shock and you don't really know what's going on. So I can't even really tell you what happened or what he said. But the next thing I know is that I'm being wheeled into an OR. And because I guess they felt that it was such an emergent situation, they didn't have time to give me an epidural or a spinal. And so what was going to be happening next was that I was going to be put under general anesthetic, under general anesthesia. So, and again, I remember sort of being wheeled down the hall into the operating room, sort of screaming out for my wife, like, where is my wife? Like, why isn't she with me? I know that our midwife advocated for Shona to be able to be in the operating room when the birth happened. And luckily, what do they call it? The anesthesiologist knew Shona. And so he allowed her to be in the operating room with us. So the next thing I know, they've put me on my back on an operating table. And it is like the movies, like, it's really, really bright, really, really sterile, really, really scary. And I'm just like sort of lying there, dropped down, and then there's somebody shaving my pubic hair, and there's somebody on my right-hand side telling me what's going to be happening. And I just remember, and I don't even know that I knew that, like, it was happening that quickly, because then the next thing I know, they had put a mask on me, and that was it, lights out. So the cesarean happened. I was unconscious. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up in a recovery room. So, you know, my water broke at 2:30 a.m. and Juniper was born at the hospital at 7:13. And waking up, I was in tremendous pain, and Shona was there, and she had Juniper, but I was still so out of it that, like, I couldn't even, like, they were like, do you want to hold her? And, like, I couldn't even hold her because I was in so much pain, and just so out of it. So that's the birth story in a nutshell. And I can't explain the grief and trauma that came with it. And just, like, how difficult the next few days were, because I felt like I had this baby who, I don't know, it's like, because I wasn't there for her birth, I was unconscious. I feel like I wasn't there. I wasn't a part of it. So it was breaking. One minute I was pregnant, and the next minute there was this baby here. And I was recovering from a major surgery. I was on heavy drugs. That I just, like, couldn't, I was so devastated, and trying to recover and trying to realize that, like, I had this baby who I'd been waiting for over a year. And it was really, really hard. And I I don't know. I just really think it's important for people to understand that, every birth is different and you never know what's going to happen. And even when you think that you're the most informed, educated person, these things still happen. I think it's interesting that, in the months leading up to Juniper's birth, I became really, really obsessed with breech birth. And so I follow all sorts of social media accounts, and one of them had a bunch of breech birth deliveries that I had been watching. And it's like, I knew, but I didn't know. And I wish that I had been able to advocate for myself more. And I wish that we had known, because I do truly believe that I would have been able to give birth to her vaginally. And I think what is so unfortunate is that, what has happened in North America is that it's not that breech birth is inherently unsafe. It's that we don't have care providers who are trained in vaginal breech birth. And that is something that's been happening slowly over time. There was a trial, it was called the Term Breech Trial, which is a study that came out in the year 2000 that really changed the way that we saw breech birth, and it became inherently risky, and we stopped training our care providers. So I don't know. I just feel really let down by the whole thing. And I can't explain the grief that came with it, because it felt like all of my control was taken away from me, and that I wasn't an active participant in her birth. And so then, having a newborn and trying to recover from that was just very, very difficult. So it was just a very different experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Caitlin, I just want to acknowledge you.
Thanks.
I just want to acknowledge you for the sharing, for the candor, for the rawness of how it landed, how it felt, and even the parts that are difficult to articulate. And I think some of this does go beyond words, and it just is. And so I do want to take this moment to acknowledge you, and that I appreciate you, and that I feel for you, and I grieve with you for that. And I think there are many others listening as well who could either relate to your experience because of their own, or because of one that they've heard, or just because of now having listened to yours. And I hold space for you to be well, to honor your experience, to heal in the way that serves you and in the time that serves you. And just that I'm here for that. And I have a lot of love for you and for your experience.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. I just think that, excuse me, I just think that these conversations are so important, so that people know what it's like, and that birth can be all sorts of different things. And I think the other thing that, I'm learning now is that, we don't talk about the recovery from a C-section all that much either, and just how difficult it is. It's a major surgery, and they, cut through your muscles and organs and all of those things. And so trying to welcome a newborn into the world while recovering from major surgery is no small feat.
Yeah.
And I don't think we give birthing people enough credit for what that's like. So I really appreciate you giving me the space to be able to, talk about this topic and talk about birth trauma, because I think, again, like trying to conceive or a conception journey, it's one of those things that I don't think people truly understand until you've been there.
Caitlin, first of all, I just want to say thank you for sharing the way that you did so fully, and allowing us into this experience with you as listeners. And I've been following you on Instagram, and you write some just absolutely beautiful, raw, very honest things on your Instagram account. And there's one post that you made, and if I have your permission, I'd like to just read a couple of lines from it, because I found it very moving as it relates to this experience. Would you mind if I just read a couple sentences of what you wrote?
Sure.
You said, "I know there are many lessons in this, and I will hold each one tenderly in the palm of my hand, the grief and the love. I will feel it all. move through it instead of around it. And I just hearing you share, and the way that you shared, and talking about everything in the detail that you did, I absolutely get the sense that feeling it all and moving through it instead of around it. I appreciate the courage that you're putting on display here, in bringing us into that process with you of just feeling it all and choosing to move through it, like you said, rather than skirting around things, and bringing up topics which aren't talked about enough, and shining light on things that aren't discussed and can just be easily forgotten or pushed aside. So I really appreciate you in how you're bringing these things up to light for all of us to look at and to think about for ourselves. So thank you so much for everything you shared with us today.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And thank you for bringing up that piece, because I think that that's part of it too, is that when things like this happen, you're often met with, well, all that matters is that you and the baby are okay, and that you are healthy. And when and I had that said to me multiple times after Juniper was born. And I remember, crying inside saying, but I'm not okay. And I think that, what I learned in the process was just that, like, I need to experience every feeling that I'm having right now in order to move past it, so that this trauma doesn't live in me for longer than it needs to. And I think that by allowing myself to grieve in that way, and it was really hard. And, at some point, Shona, didn't understand, because she's like, why can't you just move on from this? And I was like, because I'm not there yet. And I think now, 3 months postpartum, the trauma is settling in my body a little bit, but I really needed that space to feel it all. So thank you for bringing that up, Matthew. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And, it's really interesting you brought that up. Like, the conversation or the comments that you heard, people saying, oh, all that matters is that you have a healthy baby. I've said that on this podcast. I remember about 4 years ago, early on in the show, I said something like that to one of the moms who was sharing her story. And, in our conversation, she said, no, it really is important that we acknowledge that, yeah, the baby is here, but mom may not be okay. And these traumatic experiences are very real, and they don't just go away when, you hold your baby for the first time and you smell their hair and they look at you. It doesn't just go away. So thank you again, Caitlin, for bringing that up, because as a partner and a birth supporter and a birth advocate, I need to be educated, and I'm constantly learning new things. And there are people who are listening who may have held on to some of those attitudes, like, okay, well, the baby's here, so everything is fine. But that's not always the case. And it is so important that we all hold space for everyone involved and everybody's experience, and we don't just push things aside like that. So again, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the space to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
Caitlin, my final question for you is there anything that you're currently doing, whether it's a habit or even a mindset, that is helping you right now, or anything that you've noticed has been effective in your healing journey?
I think that one of the things that I've been trying to practice, and not just in regards to this, but just into life and healing in general, is to be where my feet are. And so it's sort of the concept of presence. And so I need to be in this moment, and in this moment, I'm okay. And so while, things come up and flashbacks come up, it's, be where my feet are, look at the ground, look at my feet, what am I feeling? And in this moment, it's okay. So I think that that's one thing that I've been trying to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
so
that's great
someone
advice.
out there right now is going to be where their feet are. They're going to look down right now and say, thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for the space.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And it's ongoing, and it's a continuum. So just for you, what I would share with you, just to hold space for you, is it doesn't have to be a destination kind of thing, that you're always growing and evolving and healing. And so just to give yourself that space and that grace, whatever term there resonates with you. But, and by you sharing right now is so healing, for me as an observer and someone just listening, and then for others as well. So thank you, Caitlin, for being here with us again. It's been such a pleasure to have you this many times, and to Shona.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and to the girls, and much love. And we'll again link our original episodes, as well as I'm sure there are going to be some people who want to reach out or just share their feedback or share their love for your story. So I'd like to put that out there as well for anyone who wants to connect with you on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. I'm very passionate about this, so I'm absolutely open to that.
Cool.
Beautiful. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Quick note about the Doing It at Home podcast. Matthew and I are not doctors or medical professionals, and nothing we say should be taken as medical advice or opinion. If you have medical or health-related questions, please take them to a trained professional. We're here simply to entertain you with stories and conversations about pregnancy, birth, and parenthood.